Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the articles displayed on the screen from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 8th August 2019. So let us start our discussion. Now before starting the discussion of today's newspaper, let us take up this question which was asked in the prelims of 2019 and was also covered in the Daily News Simplified. So the question reads, which of the following statements are correct about the deposits of methane hydrates? The first statement is that the global warming might trigger the release of methane gas from these deposits. Second statement reads, large deposits of methane hydrates are found in the Arctic tundra and under the seafloor. And the third statement reads that the methane in atmosphere oxidizes to carbon dioxide after a decade or two. Now the issue of methane hydrates and the CO2 gas hydrates was discussed in the Daily News Simplified of 8th January 2019. So if you look at this explanation in the Daily News Simplified of 8th January 2019, you will find that the gas hydrates are important for the seafloor stability studies because melting gas hydrates may cause seafloor landslides. So this shows that the gas hydrates are deposited under the seafloor. So by this easily you can answer that the second statement is correct because large deposits of methane hydrates are found under the seafloor and in the Arctic tundra. Now by knowing that the second statement is correct, you can also reach to the conclusion that the first is also correct. This is because the global warming might trigger the release of methane gas from these deposits. So if due to the global warming, the ice caps in the tundra region melts down, these methane gas will be exposed, and as we know that the methane gas is a potential greenhouse gas, so it will lead to global warming, and this has been discussed in this statement here. That methane is a potent greenhouse gas and methane released from the gas hydrates may therefore play a significant role in the climate change. Now after knowing that the first and the second statements are correct, we have to identify if the third statement is correct or not. And this statement reads that methane in the atmosphere oxidizes to CO2 after a decade or two. Now in this DNS we had discussed the stability of the methane hydrate as well as the CO2 hydrate. And it was discussed that the hydrates of the carbon dioxide are thermodynamically more stable as compared to the hydrates of methane. And this was in the context that the scientists were trying to find out the ways to store the CO2 hydrates under the seabed. And this was because the CO2 hydrates were more stable as compared to that of CH4. However, as we have learned in this DNS that the carbon dioxide hydrates are more stable as compared to the methane hydrates, we understand that the methane hydrates which are not stable will be converted into the carbon dioxide eventually. So by this you can reach the conclusion that the methane in atmosphere oxidizes to carbon dioxide after a decade or two. So in this context the correct answer here is D, that is 1, 2 and 3. After this let us take up the discussion for today's newspaper. Now this article on page number 10 talks about the issue of Hong Kong. And especially it covers the issues between Hong Kong and China and the protests that are going on in the Hong Kong. So in this article, we will first try to understand the historical background of this conflict between Hong Kong and China. And after that, we will understand the current issue which is going on in Hong Kong. And this can be important for us from world history point of view as well as from the IR point of view, in which we will try to understand what are the stakes of India in Hong Kong. So first let us look at the Hong Kong issue from the historical perspective. So here it should be understood that the Hong Kong was acquired by Britain after defeating China in the Opium War. And this Opium War between China and Britain started because the Qing dynasty in China attempted to crack down on the illegal opium trade, which was leading to widespread addiction in the China. So after being defeated by the Britain in 1842, China agreed to cede the island of Hong Kong to British in perpetuity through a treaty known as the Treaty of Nanjing. And over the next half century, UK took control of other neighboring islands of Hong Kong, which is known as the present day Hong Kong. And finally in 1898, through a convention, the Hong Kong territory was leased to Britain for 99 years. And under the terms of this treaty, China would regain the control of the leased islands on July 1st, 1997. Now as the British relations with the Hong Kong territory date back to 1840s, similarly because India was a part or a colony of the British Empire, that is why India's relations with the Hong Kong also date back to this period of 1840s. So before the end of this 99-year lease, The Britain and China signed a joint declaration on the future of Hong Kong in the year 1984. And under this joint declaration, a new system of administration was to be designed for Hong Kong. And this was known as one country and two systems approach. Now, under this system, this British controlled territory was handed over to China and the Chinese sovereignty extended to Hong Kong. However, the territory of Hong Kong retained its original political and economic system. And regarding this, the political process in Hong Kong was to be guided according to the province's basic law. Now, this system of Hong Kong has two special features. The first is that the socialist system and the policies that are being practiced in China will not be extended to Hong Kong. And this Hong Kong special administrative region will have the same capitalist system which it has been practicing for past 50 years. And this will be the way of life in Hong Kong for coming next 50 years. Now, besides the capitalist system that will be practiced in Hong Kong, there will be a chief executive who will be the highest representative leader in Hong Kong. And he shall be selected by election or through the consultations held locally and will be appointed by the Central People's Government of China. Now, here it is to be understood that the person who will stand for the elections of the chief executive will be first nominated by a nominating committee. And these nominations are presently being done by the Central Government of China. So, after the candidates for the chief executive are nominated by the Chinese government, these people stand for elections and one of them is appointed as the chief executive after the election process through the universal adult suffrage in Hong Kong. So in short, China nominates who will stand for this position. However, the final selection or election for the chief executive is done through the voting from the people of Hong Kong. Now after this, let us look at the current position and significance of Hong Kong. So in this line, let us first understand the geographical significance of the location of Hong Kong for China. Now the Hong Kong forms a part of the Pearl River Delta metropolitan region where the Pearl River flows into South China. So as you can see in this map, the Hong Kong is located at the mouth of South China Sea. Further, it is the wealthiest region in South China and the largest urban area in the world in both size and population. Further, it includes major economic centers such as the Guangzhou, the Shenzhen, Macau, etc. And its GDP is at $1.2 trillion, which makes it the largest economic region in Southeast Asia, which is even more than Indonesia. So it has economic significance, and besides this, it has the location which is very important for China, and this is because it opens into the South China Sea. Now let us understand why are protests going on in the Hong Kong and what is the present cause of tension between China and the Hong Kong. So first is related to the election of the chief executive in the Hong Kong. Now as we have learned that the Chinese government nominates the individuals who can stand for the chief executive in Hong Kong. Now in this background, the China wants its control on the nomination process, wherein China nominates only pro-Chinese government individuals that do not critique the Chinese policies in Hong Kong. Now the protesters or the activists are pro-democracy and they want a more direct election process in Hong Kong. And they want that there should be no interference or control of China on the elections of chief executive of Hong Kong. Now before 1997, the economic scenario was very different. And at that point of time, Hong Kong was the main investor in the mainland China. However, presently after 20 years, the situation has now changed and China has become an economic superpower. And that is why the Chinese control over the Hong Kong is increasing economically day by day. Further, another cause of tension between China and Hong Kong is related to the cultural differences between Hong Kong and China. Now, the people in mainland China are Mandarin speaking. However, the Hong Kong is a Cantonese speaking region. So the languages in both these regions is different. So they are linguistically very different, and which shows the cultural differences between China and Hong Kong. And finally, the Hong Kong considers itself culturally distinct from China like other countries of the Indo-China region. So the issues are mainly related to the election system of the chief executive of Hong Kong, wherein the interference of China has increased and China wants to retain its control on the nomination process so that they can appoint a person who is pro-China. And by that, they can indirectly control the Hong Kong's government. And as against this, the protesters are demanding that the process of election of the chief executive should be democratic in nature and there should be no interference of China in this process. Now after this, let us understand what is the issue which has been raised in this article in the newspaper. Now as we all know that Hong Kong is currently witnessing an anti-government and pro-democracy protest. Now this is because recently a bill has been introduced in the Hong Kong which will allow the courts in Hong Kong to extradite any person to mainland China. Now if this bill is passed, it will allow China to legally take actions against anti-China activists. So what would happen is that if anybody is protesting in Hong Kong against the Chinese government, it will provide the powers to the Hong Kong courts to extradite or send that person to mainland China for his legal trial. And that is how the Chinese government seeks to control these protests in Hong Kong. Further, China has also hinted that they will use their army, which is known as the People's Liberation Army, to quell or control the protests in Hong Kong. However, the author has raised the concern that this will lead to a similar fallout as the Tiananmen Square incident in 1989. Now about this incident you will read in your world history, and in these protests at the Tiananmen Square in China in 1989, China used its army, and this led to the killing of thousands of pro-democracy protesters in China. So in this background, it has been highlighted that this would not be tolerated by other countries in the present scenario like the United States, UK and the European Union. Now presently, the China has put this law on hold. However, the protests are still continuing because the activists are protesting against the increased intrusion of the Chinese government in the democratic affairs of Hong Kong. And finally, let us look at the India-Hong Kong relations. Now in this line, you should note that India respects and follows the one nation, two system policy between China and Hong Kong. Now both China and the Hong Kong follow two separate economic systems. And in this line, India has signed separate agreements with China and with Hong Kong. So in this background, India has signed the double taxation avoidance agreement with the Hong Kong. Now since Hong Kong has always had liberal economic policies, it has always acted as a gateway to China for the companies in the rest part of the world. Now what this means is that various companies of the world used to invest in Hong Kong, and through Hong Kong they used to invest in China. Now with rapid growth and engagement between the Chinese and the Indian economies, now the Hong Kong is also acting as a gateway to India. This is because India has signed a double taxation avoidance agreement with Hong Kong, and that is why many Chinese companies are routing their investments into India through the Hong Kong. Further, Hong Kong is a major re-exporter of the items it imports from India into the mainland China. Now India is Hong Kong's third largest export market destination after China and US. And also, Hong Kong is India's third largest export market after US and UAE. Further, Hong Kong occupies 12th position in the FDI equity inflows into India in the year 2018. So this shows that Hong Kong remains a very important partner for India as far as economy is concerned. Further, India has had cultural engagement with Hong Kong, and it should be noted that Hong Kong has for more than 150 years been home to a large Indian community. And this Indian community in Hong Kong has contributed to the oldest university in Hong Kong, which is known as the Hong Kong University. And several Hong Kong-based persons of Indian origin have been awarded by the Pravasi Bharati Samman Award. So all these things highlight that India has got important economic as well as cultural relations with the Hong Kong. So all these aspects show that India has had very good economic relations with the Hong Kong, and it is one of the important economic partners for India. And if due to Chinese intrusions, the Hong Kong economy is impacted, it will have repercussions for Indian economy as well. So these are few aspects of the Hong Kong protests and what are the issues that are going on in Hong Kong. With this, let's move to the next article. Now this article on page number 10 talks about the nature of Indian federalism, and the author has termed this Indian federalism as an asymmetric federalism or asymmetric constitutional provision. So in this background, the author highlights that the recent move of central government to scrap the Article 370 and break the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories exposes this asymmetric nature of constitutional provisions, and especially related to federalism. So this will form an important part for us under the General Studies paper 2 related to polity and constitution. So in this background, let's understand the key points which have been highlighted by the author. Now first, the article talks about the regional politics in India since 1989 till 2014. And in this, it has been highlighted that there was emergence of regional political parties during this time period. And due to the emergence and dominance of the regional parties in the national politics, it led to the deepening of federalism in India and also led to the growing autonomy of federal units vis-a-vis the center. However, after 2014, the scenario has changed completely because of one-party dominance at the central government level. Now, since 2014, with the emergence of single-party dominance at the central government level, the importance of the federal units has decreased. And in this background, the center has taken the decision of abrogating the Article 370 in case of Kashmir. Now, in this background, we should understand that the asymmetric federalism involves the granting of differential rights to certain federal subunits, and which is often in recognition of their distinctive ethnic identity. Now, as we all know that India is a union of various states, and the Indian Constitution provides for certain special features or special provisions with respect to certain states, and these provisions have been provided in the Article 371. Now, similarly, because of a different historical background in the way in which the Kashmir was integrated into India, there was a special article related to Kashmir which was 370. Now, Kashmir was added to India through an instrument of accession which was signed between India and the then ruler of Kashmir. Now, what this instrument of accession did to the Kashmir was that it added Kashmir to India and also provided it the autonomy in its functioning beyond most of the provisions of Indian Constitution. And this instrument of accession led to the incorporation of Article 370 as a temporary provision in the Indian Constitution. Now, in this background, the author has highlighted that this transitional or temporary clause of Article 370 became semi-permanent institutional compromise over a period of time. And this was mainly because of the politics which was taking place at the central government level, which was more dominated by the regional parties. However, with the emergence of single-party dominance at the center level after 2014, this importance or the power of the federal units is decreasing. And it is due to the dominance of single party at central level after the 2014 elections. The Kashmir's special provisions have been done away with. Now, in this background of asymmetric federalism, let us understand what are the other important features or provisions in the Constitution of India which have been provided for other states. Now, such special features or asymmetric agreements or arrangements were done not only with the state of Jammu and Kashmir. However, such agreements were done with other states as well. For example, such asymmetric agreements were reached out with Nagaland and the Mizoram. And due to this, Article 371 was added to the Indian Constitution. Further, when Sikkim joined Indian Union in the early 1970s, Article 371F was added to the Indian Constitution. And this special Article 371F related to the state of Sikkim allowed for laws that were in place before the Sikkim's accession to India. Now, there are certain special provisions regarding various states in India. And these provisions are reflected in various articles like the Article 371A, which is related to the state of Nagaland, Article 371B, which is related to the state of Assam, etc. Now, this Article 371 also contains measures or provisions related to the states for providing intra-state equity. And this is in the case of the state of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Gujarat and Karnataka. Now, why such asymmetric arrangement has been done? So simply you should understand that although all states in India or all federal units in India have same provisions in the Constitution, there are certain special provisions provided to some of the states in order to incorporate their ethnic identities or their special historic relation with India. And that is why, due to such asymmetric agreements, Article 370 and 371 were added in the Indian Constitution. Now, what are the arguments in favor of such asymmetric agreements? Let us understand them. So, various arguments have been forwarded regarding the asymmetric federalism. The first argument is that asymmetric constitutional provisions are common features of federalism in diverse societies. Now, as we all know that India is a diverse society and it has many regions with different languages and different cultures. Further, various states or regions in India have had different historical backgrounds and their relations with the mainland India have been different. And in this background, we have had various asymmetric constitutional provisions. Now, the first argument in favor of such asymmetric federalism is that such arrangements dampen the secessionist conflicts or it reduces the separatist tendency in various states. This is because such kind of asymmetric agreements recognize the multiple modes of belonging to one union. So such arrangements show that the center has accepted that there can be special features or different ways of accommodating the diversity. And that is why it reduces the separatist or secessionist tendencies. Now, the argument opposed to this is that such agreements can further aggravate or lead to the growth of secessionist tendencies or separatist tendencies among states. This is because although there is special features or arrangements for accommodating the diversity, it leads to the denial of autonomy to such states. For example, the Jammu Kashmir had been demanding absolute autonomy from the Indian Union. However, such a demand was not acceptable to the Union of India. So the argument which is opposed to such asymmetric or special provisions for certain states is that it leads to or increases the separatist tendency among various states. Now, such agreements or arrangements have also been criticized by major national communities and other states which do not have such special agreements. Now, the present government at the center, while removing the Article 370, has said that such asymmetric provisions are discriminatory in nature and they do not ensure equality. And in this line, the central government has highlighted the example of Article 35A, which discriminates against buying property in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, as it privileges certain kinds of special identities over the others. So they have said that such special provisions are against the notion of equality. Further, the government has claimed that the Article 370, which provided for special powers to the government of Jammu and Kashmir, was the root cause of terrorism in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Further, the government has highlighted that provisions for autonomy are anti-egalitarian because they prevent the extension of rights in force elsewhere in the country to those particular regions. For example, in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, there was no provision till now for the reservation of scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. So one of the arguments in removing the Article 370 was that now the provisions of reservations for vulnerable sections like the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes can be extended to the newly created union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. Now, federalism in certain countries have been constraining and undermining the consolidation of power of national governments. For example, in United States of America, the federal units are sacrosanct in nature and they cannot be broken by the will of national government. Further, various states of United States of America have got equal representation in the Senate or the upper house, which is equivalent to the Rajya Sabha of India. However, in India, the scenario is not the same because different states have different representations in Rajya Sabha. For example, the highly populated state of Uttar Pradesh has the highest number of seats in Rajya Sabha, while small states like Nagaland, Sikkim and Mizoram have lesser number of seats. So in this line, it has been highlighted that India represents a system where the design of federalism places fewer checks on the power of national governments or national majorities. And in this line, the Rajya Sabha has lesser power with respect to passing money bills as compared to that of Lok Sabha. Further, Indian Constitution provides autonomy to the states under the 7th schedule, but in the times of emergency, empowers the union government to take over such provisions. Further, in case of concurrent list, the union government or the parliament has the overriding powers on the powers of state governments. So in this line, the author has highlighted that placing this kind of flexibility in the hands of central government was deliberate and designed to enable decisive central action to protect national integrity in the aftermath of partition. And this was also done to arrest the separatist tendency of various regions in India. Now finally, let us understand that how such asymmetric arrangements have helped the Indian federalism in the past and why such step of removing the Article 370 unilaterally without a consensus is a departure from the previous precedents in India. Now in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar highlighted the difference between the tight mold of other federal systems and the flexibility which was provided in the Indian federal structure. And in this line he argued that such a flexible system in India allowed for both unitary as well as federal features according to the requirements and its time and circumstances. Further, the constitutional provisions has allowed the strengthening of Indian federalism by providing the Article 3 in the Constitution. And this has provided provisions for the creation of new states and alteration of boundaries on the regional demands based on identity and language. And based on this article, various new states have been created in the background of demand for new states based on linguistic and other aspirations. Now, as we know that the Indian Constitution does not provide the states with a veto power over their own bifurcation. Now, such absence of veto power has enabled the Constitution and the central government to accommodate the linguistic and the ethnic diversities in a way that would have been much harder in a more rigid federal system. So such flexibility which has been provided in the Indian Constitution has helped the central government in accommodating the linguistic and ethnic diversity. Further, such a flexible federal system has allowed the central government to adopt asymmetrical measures without facing backlash from other regions which might have resented the special treatment of minority regions. So in this background, the author highlights that until 2000s, most of these regional changes in India were done based on slow process of consensus building within the regions concerned. However, the author has highlighted that by abrogating or removing the Article 370 and bifurcating the state of Jammu and Kashmir and downgrading its status into union territory, the government has used the flexibility of the federal provisions of Indian Constitution to other ends. And this abrogation without the consensus is a departure from the previous precedents, which is unknown in Indian federalism and can have unknown and different implications for the federalism of India. So the author is a bit skeptical about the present move of the government regarding the removal of Article 370 without a consensus and removing such an article unilaterally. Now, to better understand this article, you should go through the provisions of Indian federalism in the Lakshmikant book of Indian Polity. And after that, you can understand the various arguments that have been raised in this article by the author. So with this, let's move to the next article. Now, this article on page number 11 highlights that it is for the first time in India that the status of a state has been reduced to a union territory. Because previously, all the union territories were created, they were not created by the way of breaking a state. So in this background, the article highlights the various union territories which were created in India. For example, the Union Territory of Delhi and the Union Territory of Puducherry. And besides this, it also highlights the case of various union territories which were later converted into states. So in this background, it also highlights the powers of the Lieutenant Governor of the newly created Jammu and Kashmir. And finally, it says that such a state has been broken into two union territories without even a constitutional amendment. So this will form a part of the General Studies paper 2 under the topic Constitution and Polity, and various aspects of this article have already been covered in the DNS of 6th August and also in the previous article that we have discussed in this DNS. Now, how the newly created Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir will be governed has been explained in this article. So it states that in the Jammu and Kashmir there will be a centrally appointed administrator by the name Lieutenant Governor, and who will have power to make a wide range of decisions related to this union territory. Now previously what used to happen is that, like a regular governor, the governor of Jammu and Kashmir too acted typically on the aid and advice of the state's council of ministers, and he had less discretionary powers as compared to that of the lieutenant governor. Now, after the reorganization, the legislature of Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir will be similar to that of the Union Territory of Puducherry. And this legislature will have the power to enact laws on the matters in the state list as well as that of the concurrent list of the Constitution. However, the Indian Parliament will retain the power of enacting overriding laws. So this shows that now the power of the parliament with respect to legislations related to the Jammu and Kashmir have increased after the Jammu and Kashmir has been created as a union territory. So this will ultimately lead to the decision-making power of legislature to be diluted. Now further, the author highlights the manner in which other union territories with legislatures were created, for example Delhi, and also how such union territories were converted into states. And this is the first time in India that a state has been broken down into a union territory. Now when the Constitution of India was adopted, the states were divided into three categories. And these categories were Part A, Part B and Part C. Now Delhi was a part of the Part C under the Indian Constitution, and it was a state administered by the President acting through a Chief Commissioner or the Lieutenant Governor. In 1956, after the State Reorganization Act was passed, such a distribution into Part A, B and C was done away with, and all the members of the Part C states were converted into union territories. Now from 1952 to 1956, the Delhi had a legislative assembly. However, it had very limited powers. Now after 1956, some of the union territories were given legislatures which were ultimately converted into states, and these include the Himachal Pradesh, Manipur, Tripura and Goa. Now in 1992, Delhi was given the status of partial statehood, and it was given full legislative powers on all the state subjects or the subjects which were listed in the state list except the powers on public order, police and the land. Now this became a contentious issue in the governance of Delhi, and many a times the decisions taken by the democratically elected government were nullified by the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. Now this matter went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in 2018 put an end to this tussle between the government of Delhi and the Lieutenant Governor. So in the case of Delhi, the Supreme Court had highlighted that whenever there is a difference in opinion between the legislature and the Lieutenant Governor, the Lieutenant Governor will abide by the opinion of the government, and only in exceptional cases can this Lieutenant Governor override the state legislature's will. So in this manner, the Supreme Court had constrained the powers of the Lieutenant Governor. Now the confrontation between the elected government in Delhi and the Lieutenant Governor has been covered in some of the previous DNSs and has also been covered in the Focus magazine in the past. However, the main issue that is to be understood here is that this is the first instance of a state being converted into a union territory in India. And further, creation of such union territories with legislative assemblies has created the problems of governance in such union territories. For example, in Delhi, there has been a continuous confrontation between the Lieutenant Governor and the elected Council of Ministers. And that is why that matter has went to the Supreme Court. Similarly, a confrontation has been going on in the state of Puducherry between the elected representatives and the administrator of Puducherry. Further, one of the problems with the creation of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir by bifurcating the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, the author has highlighted that it has not been created by a constitutional amendment. So in this regard, the author says that the Delhi's conversion into a Union Territory was carried out through a constitutional amendment. So in this line, it says that such provisions for the Union Territory of Delhi cannot be easily amended further. However, the conversion of the state of Jammu and Kashmir into a union territory was effected through a regular law of parliament. So in this line, the author says that it can easily be amended at the behest of a majoritarian consensus from time to time, which means that the status of the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir can be further changed with the simple law of the parliament, which does not require the amendment of constitution. And finally, there are some observations on the Indian federalism. The first is that the special status for states in India is not extraordinary in nature, because several states in India enjoy differential rights in their relationship to the union by the constitutional design, and all such relationships between the states and the union depends on their unique cultural, ethnic and geopolitical compositions. And further, such asymmetric arrangements have been done in order to incorporate and assimilate the ethnic and the tribal differences between those states. For example, the states of Tripura, Arunachal, Manipur and Nagaland have been provided with special provisions because of tribal and different ethnic bases. So in this line, the author highlights that the Constitution of India chose a asymmetrical federal principle to honor these subjective contexts of these states. And about this we have already read in the previous article. So this article has raised the concerns regarding the conversion of state of Jammu and Kashmir into a union territory by using a simple law and not the constitutional amendment. And in this line, the author has highlighted the concern that more such laws can be enacted which will disregard the subjective context of the people and will devoid these people of their right to full democratic participation. With this, let's move to the next article. Now, these articles on page number 1 and page number 15 are related to the recent rate cut by the Reserve Bank of India. Now, this will form a part of the General Studies paper 3 in the mains examination under the topic Economic Development. So, we will be clubbing the content and the details of these articles into one article. So, first we will understand what are the new policy rate changes and also what are the important measures that have been taken related to the NBFC sector and the payment systems. So in the response to the present economic slowdown, the RBI has decided to reduce the benchmark repo rate by 35 basis points to 5.4 from the present 5.75%. Now regarding the basics of the monetary policy tools, you can go through the NCERT or through any static book related to the Indian economy. Now what is unique about this rate cut is that this is the first time that RBI has moved the interest rates by a figure that is not a multiple of 25 basis points. Now, why was such a move taken? This was because the cut of 25 basis point was considered to be inadequate for improving the growth or monetary policy transmission. However, the cut of 50 basis points was considered to be much higher. And that is why the reduction in the repo rate was done by a 35 basis points, which lies within 25 and the 50 basis points range. Further, due to the economic slowdown, the RBI has also slashed its prediction for the real GDP growth rate for 2019 and 20 from 7% to 6.9%. Now, besides the rate cut, let us understand what are the important decisions which have been taken related to the NBFC sector and the payment system, etc. So, the new rates after the recent rate cuts of the RBI are that the repo rate is at about 5.4%, while the reverse repo rate is at 5.15%. Further, various relief measures have been announced for the NBFC or the non-banking financial company sector. Now, as we all know that the NBFC sector was facing a liquidity crisis because of the defaulting of one of the important NBFCs, that is the IL&FS. So, in this background, the RBI has decided to raise a bank's exposure limit to a single NBFC from the present 15% to 20% of the tier 1 of the bank. Now, this tier 1 and tier 2 capitals are part of the capital adequacy ratio of the bank. And simply this tier 1 capital represents the total equity which is infused into the bank. So now the exposure of a particular bank to a single NBFC has been increased from 15 to 20%, and this move will improve the liquidity situation and the credit flow to the NBFCs. Now further, the RBI has decided that whatever the banks are lending to registered NBFCs, and if such NBFCs are lending to the agriculture, MSME and the housing sector, such lending will be classified as the priority sector lender. Now, as we know that to improve the lending to the small players in the economy like the agriculture sector and the MSME sector, the RBI provides for priority sector lending through the banks. And under this, the banks have to lend a particular percentage of their total lending to these sectors. So in this background, the RBI has decided that whatever lending the banks are doing to the NBFCs and which NBFCs are on lending to these priority sectors will be classified as the priority sector lending for that particular bank. And the argument for this is that it would augment the flow of credit to priority sectors, which contribute significantly to the exports and the employment in the Indian economy. Now, besides the above measures, various other measures have also been announced in the recent monetary policy. The first is related to the 24/7 NEFT transfer. And a major change has been done related to the NEFT transfer system, that is the National Electronic Fund Transfer System. And from December 2019 onwards, such payments will be available on a 24/7 basis. And regarding the NEFT, you should note that it is a payment system operated by the Reserve Bank as a retail payment system. Further, the Bharat bill payment system has been expanded, and earlier it used to cover only 5 sections, that is the DTH or the direct to home service, electricity, gas, telecom and water bills. Now the RBI has decided to permit all the categories of billers who provide for recurring bill payments to participate in this system on a voluntary basis. So in short, the coverage of the Bharat bill payment system has been increased in the recent announcement by the RBI. Further, the RBI has proposed to facilitate the creation of a central payment fraud registry, which will track all the digital transaction frauds in the country. So these are few initiatives that have been taken by the RBI in the recent monetary policy announcement. Now, as the RBI has recently reduced the policy rates or the repo rates in its recent monetary policy announcement, the editorial questions that will the lowering of repo rate translate into increased GDP growth rate or not. Now, this aspect of monetary policy transmission has been already discussed in the DNS of 4th August 2019. So, to understand the issue of monetary policy transmission and how the reduction in repo rate or the increase in repo rate affects the economy, you should go through this DNS of 4th August 2019. Now, you should try these questions from your preliminary examination point of view, and the answer will be displayed after 5 seconds. Now, the first question reads, which of the following countries share their boundary with the South China Sea? Now, this question can be solved by using the atlas, and you will find that only Vietnam shares its boundary with the South China Sea. So, the correct answer here is A, that is 1 only. The second question reads, special provisions for which of the following states have been provided under the Article 371 of the Indian Constitution? And the states given are Rajasthan, Karnataka and Goa. So you should note that under the Article 371, there is no special provision related to the state of Rajasthan. So by this, you can easily eliminate the options A, B and D. So the correct answer is 2 and 3 only. After this, you should try both these questions. Answer will be displayed after 5 seconds. The first question reads, consider the following statements, and the first statement is that all states have equal number of seats in Rajya Sabha, which is incorrect because seats in the Rajya Sabha have been allocated based on the population. And as we know that Uttar Pradesh has the highest number of seats in Rajya Sabha. The second statement reads that the Legislative Assembly of Delhi has powers to legislate on all the subjects under the state list, which is incorrect because it has powers to legislate on all the subjects except 3 subjects. These are law and order, land and police. That is why the second statement is also incorrect. So the correct answer here is D, that is neither 1 nor 2. And the last question reads, which of the following are the tributaries of river Godavari? So here you should note that Vamshadhara is not a tributary of Godavari and it is an independent river which flows into the Bay of Bengal. So correct answer here is 1 and 3 only. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let's move on to the question for the day.